Hi, I'm Sharon Sutherland, and I'm doing a quick recording of materials that I presented on April 12th for CORE's new Mediators group. At that time, I was doing a presentation on writing proposals for conflict resolution presentations. We had quite a number of people who were new Mediators group members, though, who were unable to attend that day and who expressed interest in knowing more about the topic. And for that reason, I'm making this available to new Mediators group members and along with the materials that were presented that day. So there's some additional materials that you should have as well. The starting point on where to present um, really is not just looking at where are their conferences, although you will find that one of the materials that has been attached is a list of conflict resolution conferences and presentation opportunities. And certainly the intention is to give you some ideas of places you might present, but also to think about why you want to present, because that will help inform your choices of places that you might choose to present. For instance, you might be wanting to build credibility in the field. For that reason, you might be thinking of going to conflict resolution conferences where you can talk about something that you've been working on, something that you bring from another area of practice, an interest area, something that you know about that you're able to apply to conflict resolution that might give you some profile within the community as doing something different. Do you do that at a local, a national, or an international level? That might be dictated by the fact that you're trying to gain credibility and you'd like to know first that you're gaining credibility in a local market, more value possibly for connecting with people in that particular area. Similarly, you might be thinking about trying to bring what you're doing to clients' attention. If that's the case, the kinds of things you might be thinking about with a conference are, do I go to a conflict resolution conference? Well, maybe if it's the Continuing Legal Education's Dispute Resolution Conference, which will be attended by lawyers who, while not necessarily clients, often drive clients to mediation, often are involved in choosing the mediators. So perhaps that is a conflict resolution conference choice. But you might instead be looking at, no, I'd like to reach small businesses, in which case maybe what you're thinking about is doing some kind of industry event, something for a small business group, something with the People's Law School, something in another place where that's the audience that you're getting. You might be thinking about doing this as your own continuing professional development, or only to actually enrich your own practice, to think about and engage in dialogue with colleagues around a specific topic that you'd like to explore more thoroughly. If that's the case, then again, conflict resolution conferences, but where? Who is coming who has the kinds of experience that you might want to tap into, that you might be able to build from? You definitely do learn something simply by putting presentations together. So doing something local because it's fast and easy and you're not going to spend any money on travel might be a good way to do it if what you're trying to do is just deepen your thinking and have a first chance at it. Going international might be more important if your idea is something that you'd like to see how it connects with what other countries are doing and practitioners in completely different areas. So different choices based on those kinds of things. And you may just be doing it for your own CPD because you do get credit for doing the presentations because you do a lot of thinking for it. Maybe you're doing it as a favor. There could be lots of different reasons why you're doing it. All I'm really suggesting is that you turn your mind to it and having thought through what you want to accomplish, then have a look at things like the lists that I've provided and other lists. You'll see lists in the Mediate BC newsletter frequently about conferences that are coming up and opportunities to apply. But have a look. There's a couple pages of conflict resolution conferences, and I've tried to be relatively selective about ones that might be of the most interest to people who are in the new mediators group. And then think about other places too. Don't limit yourself to only going to conflict resolution conferences. Conflict occurs everywhere, and really, there are very few of these kinds of events that you might want to attend that you don't have an opportunity to talk about conflict. I have Emerald City Comic Con on the list as an example because I wanted to go to Emerald City Comic Con. It was super expensive, and I really had never got my act together to go do it. But I did get my act together to go do it when I put in a proposal to present with a group of friends. And I also got in for a speaker fee instead of for paying the full price. So consider all the different possibilities of places you'd like to go. What's your elevator pitch? Before you want to do anything in terms of putting together a proposal, you want to think through what is it? What is that thing that makes it different? And how can you put it into a sentence to just put it down really clearly and simply? How's it different from what's been done before? That's usually the key thing you want to do, because if you go back over the last few years of conference proposals, chances are you'll see things repeating. They normally do. There are things that sound very much the same, but they're often different because somebody new's presenting it. They've got a different voice. They don't always do a good job of distinguishing. And if you're not well known as a speaker in the conflict resolution area, then you really have to make sure you're distinguishing, because they're not making the choice that you are going to be different and you always bring an interesting and exciting perspective to things. Instead, they're looking for, how are you defining what's different? So think about the ways that you can make it a little bit different. It might be about, you might be wanting to talk about improving listening skills, but you know improving your listening skills. Well, sure, but what about it is different? I was trying to think of places you might present something like that, and refine it a bit. And I was thinking, there's different tech conferences where it might be interesting to look at listening skills and the way that we are able to demonstrate the skills, the skills and the styles that are needed in order to convey listening within a text-based environment. So perhaps your elevator pitch could be something like, it takes new skills to work within a text-based environment and demonstrate that you're listening, in quotes. Something like that could be a way to frame it. But the idea is just to say, what's different about it? It's something new. I'm not just talking about active listening the way you've heard it before. I'm making a direct application to this particular environment, and there are some different skills I want to talk about in this environment. Most bigger conferences, at least, will have a number of different streams and at least one major theme, sometimes more than one theme. The difference between themes and streams: themes will be kind of a broad topic that they want everybody to tie into. For instance, the ADRBC symposium this year has a theme of passion, purpose, and impact in challenging times. If you look at a lot of conferences and go back over a few years, you'll see that they'll have different titles for the overall conference, even though it's normally called Conflict Resolution Conference. But this year's theme is this. And if you look back at the kinds of proposals that get accepted in those years, often they've tied themselves into that particular theme. With the ADR symposium one, for instance, that idea of challenging times, impact in challenging times, is definitely picked up. If you look at some of the things that are going to be presented, the first one that leapt out at me was that there's a panel on sexual harassment complaints, which clearly is picking up on the Me Too discussions that are going on right now, and clearly is addressing current challenging times. Being able to find a way to take your idea and tie it into that central theme really makes it much more likely that your topic is going to be chosen over somebody else who's doing something similar but isn't making that same tie-in. Streams are a little bit different. Streams occur when you're in a conference that's big enough to have concurrent sessions. Sometimes it's just two concurrent sessions. You've got a mediator stream and an arbitrator stream. You might have mediator, arbitrator, lawyer stream. You might have streams that are tied more thematically or related to practice areas. You might have a family stream and a business stream and a workplace stream. Depending on the size of the conference and the topics that are being covered, you'll often find some very different patterns. Something that is really helpful, if aside from the fact that you usually have to identify which stream you most closely fit into, you can also find that if you go back over past year's presentation lists, that there are streams that are less full than others. There is always something that they get less proposals on, and they usually don't fill entire streams. I'm not saying only present on topics that they don't have enough presentations on, But if you're really wanting to make sure that you increase the likelihood that you get accepted, think about whether you fit into some of those streams that are a little bit less occupied in past conferences. Probably the conference planners are looking for topics in those particular areas. And chances are, again, this year, there'll be a few less proposals. Of course, one of the first things you'll be asked in putting together your proposal, filling in any kind of document, is your title. And sometimes you'll be asked for more than one title. It's not uncommon to say, give us three, and they choose which one they go ahead with. So you want to try and come up with something that's descriptive. You want it to be catchy. You want it to capture your elevator pitch. If there are buzzwords, I'm using the phrase buzzwords to talk about themes. If there are buzzwords in the themes, if there are things you want to pick up on, things that will connect you to the theme, for instance, then consider making sure those are front and center. You want it to look different. You want it to look different than what has happened in the past. So find some way to distinguish it. And most importantly, I think you need to know your audience because different conferences have really different norms around how they title things. That first example there, if a vampire bites a lawyer, is it cannibalism? The demonization of lawyers an angel. That is just exactly what you would expect to see if you're going to a Slayage conference. One of the media and communication studies groups studying the Whedon verses, so Buffy the Vampire Slayer and other television programs. It's a style. It's a always a quote. It's usually a quote actually from Buffy, and then it is a subtitle. And if you don't present your title in that format, you demonstrate that you're not necessarily coming from that same community. Maybe you're not familiar with all of the readings in it. It's at least a signal that you might not be as immersed in the literature as other people are. Sometimes that's good. Usually it signals that you haven't done the research. Similarly, you might want to come up with something that's just a really clear and simple statement. The collaborative tabletop games, that one was chosen because in looking at the materials from previous Emerald City Comic Cons, it was obvious that most people don't actually see your description, that the way the program is created and the vast number of things that you can see means you're going to have a shortened topic. And that's all that is going to be said. They're just going to see your title. So it needs to spell out absolutely everything that you're doing because nobody's looking, nobody's seeing who you are, and nobody's seeing how you described your topic. So those are the kinds of things you want to take into account. Will people come in the door based on the way you've described it if that's the only way it's seen? Do look at other ones, at previous conferences from the same conference, previous programs from the same conference, and do run your titles by people who've been to that conference to see whether they think it sounds catchy. Most of the time when you're filling in a proposal form, you'll be asked for your presentation type. Um, this is actually quite an important one to think about because if you can do something that is more interactive, you probably are going to be a more popular topic. Most conference planners are looking for something that isn't just a lecture or a straight panel discussion because they're probably getting a lot of those. And it really does matter if there's variety from the sake of the audience and the participants. So think about whether or not you can do something that is more dynamic if you can. Just don't say you can do a workshop or you can make it super interactive in a 45-minute session and then fail to do it because you spend 40 minutes describing your topic. Because one of the worst things you can do is actually mislead participants about what it is you're going to do and what your presentation type is going to be. That is an absolute guarantee to get some bad reviews, and bad reviews will be taken into account the next time you apply to the same conference. So be careful, think about it, but if you can be interactive, that's awesome, and it's a great way to go. It might be as simple as changing a panel up to make it into a debate instead, or to create something where you're a talk show host and you're interviewing your panel in a different way so that it's more engaging or changes it up. But definitely do think about presentation type and be aware that even if you're applying a year in advance, and I'll probably repeat this a few times, you often are applying close to a year in advance to do some of these presentations at larger conferences. but you do have to have in mind as you're doing this proposal exactly what you're going to be doing rather than just your topic. Try and think through what it's actually going to look like. You'll be asked to fill in a variety of different logistics questions, usually things like session length, and generally speaking, most conferences will say, these are the lengths that we have, which ones would work for you, and can you take a shorter one if we decide to put you in the 45-minute slot instead of the 75 minutes you asked for? So you're usually asked that. You usually don't propose saying this would be a 3-hour one if their slots are 75 minutes. So generally speaking, have a look at that and think about it. It'll obviously affect what you say in the previous one where you're talking about the style that you're going to bring. But do think about whether there are ways you can adapt, because you are sometimes asked. You're also sometimes asked to adapt your session size, but you will often be asked what would be the ideal size for this. If you are proposing something really interactive, don't be afraid to say a relatively small group size. It underscores the fact that you actually do know how those interactive workshops work and that they will run better with a small size. Unless you have some particular method of presentation that is going to work well for a large audience. Level of audience, think that one through. Um, Two things to think about there. More people will attend if you're saying it's for everybody, and you will get a very mixed group of people. You might actually be more attractive if you really are going to do something that's very advanced and that you're not going to backtrack and try and bring beginners along with you, because there's also often a dearth of material of presentations specifically aimed at more advanced practitioners. If you're relatively new, that might not be where you want to aim your work anyway. You may actually be much more comfortable working with a beginner audience or working with a larger group of people with different backgrounds. But do think it through. There's usually space for somebody who's doing something for a more advanced audience. In terms of AV requirements, this is it. You do have to think through what you're going to need. You often get a second chance to say, ooh, I have an additional AV need about 6 weeks out from a conference if it's one of the ones that has a long planning stage. Others, it's much quicker and much more flexible in terms of AV requirements. But if you think you're going to need something particularly unique that isn't normally going to be available, uh, definitely ask for it ahead of time. I find one of the ones that people don't always have available unless it's running at a university or somewhere that has kind of already set up rooms. But if it's at a hotel or something, audio seems to be missing a lot when they provide for different presentations. They'll have various projectors, but they won't actually have an audio hookup. So if you're doing something that involves any kind of video, for instance, you may want to just make sure you add that as well. I was looking at a few proposal forms, particularly from U.S. conferences, and thought that it was probably worth mentioning CPD accreditation as an element of things that are sometimes asked for more often if you're going to something that is in the States. There are a lot of different professional organizations that are associated with conflict resolution where people will need to get specifically accredited presentations. And so if yours can be accredited, it's much more likely to get that particular audience. Um, it, it can vary quite a lot depending on where you're looking. Accreditation for something like Mediate BC usually is as simple as it's about a conflict resolution topic. You went to a presentation about it. So if you're primarily working in the field of conflict resolution, you don't always think about the ways some of the professional organizations look at accreditation. I've got the Law Society up there because I know that one a bit better than some of the others, but it's just an example. There are other groups that will have other qualifications. But for instance, with the Law Society, it's sometimes useful to recognize if your topic dabbles with, or it might be dead on, but if it approaches ethics and practice management topics, you might want to think through whether there might be enough material in your presentation to give some credit towards ethics and practice management. Lawyers in BC need to have 2 hours of ethics and practice management CPD each year. Similarly, the lawyers will have requirements if they're family mediators, arbitrators, or parenting coordinators. They'll have some very specific requirements around the types of CPD that counts as their mediation, arbitration, or parenting coordinating credit. And it's not that difficult to bring something within the sphere of what those are, but you do need to look those up if you want to bring it in. That would be probably most applicable if you were thinking about doing something for an audience of lawyers. Similarly, if you were going to do it for an audience of accountants, you might want to be conscious of what are the different CPD requirements. Is it simple enough that it is just a conflict resolution presentation? Have a thought about it. I've also thrown in the role plays as just something to think through. Early in people's careers, they often need to have some additional role play hours and to be able to specify role play hours. So if it's an approach you're going to take and you are going to have role playing, you may want to identify that element. It may be something that makes yours unique, interesting, and appeal to a specific audience. I'm choosing not to say a great deal about learning objectives. Learning objectives often are linked to the CPD and what you're putting in. So if you're aiming at a specific audience, you want to meet CPD requirements and you want to be ensure that what you're doing is actually going to qualify readily and easily, then you may want to look to what is the format that is used for that particular audience. Can you match the language that is used on what needs to be done? What do you need to do to get mediation credit for a family mediator who's also a lawyer with the Law Society of BC, for instance? And there will be very specific language attached to those kinds of things. But a lot of conferences will just say, give us learning objectives. And you want to check to see whether those learning objectives are going to be used to promote your workshop. Some places they'll print your learning objectives along with your blurb, whatever you've said as your description. And that's a different thing that you want to put down for that audience to attract people to your course, to your presentation, rather than what you might put down if you know you're speaking to the selection committee and you're just telling them, these are the things I'm going to cover. Do have a look. This is one of those areas where I would say absolutely try to get in touch with a colleague who has presented at that conference before, has had a successful proposal, and can give you an example of what they did, because you really don't have many ways to find out what it is that that particular selection committee likes without seeing something they've liked. As I said, sometimes you're proposing so far in advance that it's really difficult to imagine what would be the materials. It's also, in my case, I go the other way. I tend to be able to imagine so many materials and think, oh, that would be a great idea, and I have so much time to do it that I'm clearly going to have all those materials ready. And then actually I'm suddenly confronted with a deadline for materials and thinking, egad, I said I was going to write this entire journal article. Yeah, that's not happening anymore. You do want to think through what is it. And I do definitely recommend that you always have some kind of materials. These days, most conferences will have some kind of flash drive. They'll hand out a digital version of whatever you're providing. So you can be really quite creative in what it is. You can pull down blog posts that you've already done. You can create resource lists with hyperlinks that will be utilized on the flash drive, and those are really handy, and a lot of people will really appreciate them. But you can also link to videos. You can provide a really wide range of different kinds of things to support this particular conference presentation. So think about what it is, but also think realistically about what it is that you can get done, and don't overpromise. That said, you will probably have to say, yes, I'm definitely providing materials and it's going to look like this. Preparing your bio for a conference presentation. Do think about having co-presenters, almost regardless of the topic. There may be something that you uniquely can present by yourself and keep it really exciting. Usually having a second voice is a great idea, which is something that I'm experiencing right now as I'm losing my voice here. It's usually really helpful to have somebody there. But you will also find that a lot of the larger conferences specifically ask you to address what roles people will have, and how does your panel, how does your group, your co-presenters, how do you demonstrate their commitment to diversity? And they'll usually have some specific statement in their material saying, this is our commitment, and we try to select diverse panels, or we try to do something to underscore the importance of having panels with different voices from different communities. So think about that. It's not how you choose your co-presenters by any means, unless it is about different voices and you need to represent very specific different voices. But that said, you do want to think through, what are the differences? Are you bringing age differences, for instance? Sometimes we forget that generational difference can be an interesting difference. It may be gender. It may be that you come from very different cultural backgrounds. It may be that you've worked in really different practice areas. But do think about those things and be prepared when you go into the proposal form, that that is something that you will want to underscore somewhere, and you'll probably be asked quite directly, what is it that makes you diverse? On this slide, I just wanted to talk about the idea of being able to find a way to demonstrate your speaking skills. If you are not somebody who has done a lot of speaking, there may not be a lot of video evidence out there, for instance, on YouTube, that you've done a good job of presenting. There may be nothing that demonstrates that you get invited to a lot of different kinds of conferences to speak. And so sometimes people are thinking, well, what in the world? You know, I don't know, I've got a couple things. Who should I choose between these two relatively equally qualified candidates with decent ideas? And sometimes something that can turn it for you is having a little video or podcast or some kind of recording that demonstrates that you're actually a really skillful presenter, or at least you're an enthusiastic and engaging presenter. These are just a couple examples. I kind of want to point out that, I mean, Yuki has this great opportunity because she's done a wonderful podcast. And is able to actually link to this particular podcast. CD, this is a picture of CD doing his speed geeking last year at the core speed geeking in the fall. And I'm going to talk about that later. But because it's a 5-minute presentation, it's a great one to point to, because people don't really want to watch a big, long presentation. But an engaging 5 minutes on a topic, that's a great one as a little bit of a sample in case somebody's trying to decide if they want to take you or not. You will have, with this, a number of samples of accepted proposals. You can just have a look at those and feel free to ask me about any of them. A couple of them were written specifically to give a sample of what a speed geeking proposal might look like. Others were for academic conferences and for different conflict resolution conferences. So you've got a couple different ones. But what I would definitely say is, regardless of whether these particularly meet your needs, they'll give you a little bit of a taste of what they look like. But do identify people who have spoken in the past that might be willing to give you a proposal for the specific conference that you're proposing for. Always query a colleague. Don't be afraid to ask people to share. Feedback before sending. This is just a good idea for anything that you're doing. Get somebody to read your materials over and give you feedback on whether it sounds exciting. Hopefully you've got a colleague who is happy to have a look at what you're putting together and tell you if it's something that they would want to go to or not, or whether it actually conveys entirely what you're thinking. I don't know. I find that one of the things that I often do is get super excited about the setup for why this is an important topic. And I'm so busy talking about all of these things that are happening in the world that lead to this conclusion that we need to talk about this topic, that I really don't emphasize the topic itself enough. And it isn't always obvious on first glance because I've actually just built to that. And yet it's kind of buried. So it's always helpful for me to have somebody have a look and go, hey, do you want to just like switch the order of this stuff? You can explain why you're talking about it after you tell somebody what you're talking about. Anything like that is useful feedback. People will read it without knowing your topic, and they'll give you a much better feel for whether you've done a good job or not. Finally, I really want to encourage anybody who is listening to this, and really everybody who's in the new Mediators group, to think about putting in a proposal for our course Speed Geeking. If you weren't there last year, it was a really fun event. It was our first time trying it, and our concept is a little different than some speed geeking, where you usually rotate around rooms listening to different people give presentations. We had just the single presenter model, 5 minutes, and we were recording and live streaming. So you actually do end up with a video available on our YouTube channel of your presentation. And that was one of the reasons I was highlighting it as a good idea if you need samples of yourself talking. But it's great. 5 minutes on anything you're passionate about that relates to dispute resolution in any way. And we had some fantastic and really wide ranging topics last year. And you get maximum of 3 minutes of questions afterwards. It was a great chance to learn about some things that we really hope people will develop into fuller projects in the coming year, because they were really, really interesting ideas. It's a chance to do something in a really short form and to really test something out. All we need, if you are interested, is a title, a 50 to 100 word description. And that can be, it really can be quite short. It's like, this is the topic I want to talk about. It's 5 minutes long. You probably don't have a super long description. Your short bio, making the same points as I was talking about with your bio. Why you? What do you know about this topic? Why are you the person who should be presenting on it? And just submit just that to coreclinic1@gmail.com. We're accepting them on a rolling basis. We've got a few spots that are filled, and I'll be posting the ones that have been identified and selected already. But we can take up to 9, and we definitely have space still. So please think about putting in a proposal for Core Speed Geeking on June 4th. It'll be June 4th. You do need to be there physically. If you're thinking that you'd like to do a presentation online and you're not physically able to attend in the Lower Mainland, please let me know. We haven't really explored the possibilities, but I'm willing to sit down and chat with somebody about whether or not we think we can do something on a Skype call or something like that. It might be possible, but do approach me about it, and we can talk it through before you put in your proposal. Okay, thank you very much.